But I also wanted to talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders is the incoming chair of the Labor Committee, and now that's not it's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, I believe. Uh, that's a good thing. It's going to be very interesting to see what he's able to do with that. Of course, it would be a truer test if the House wasn't controlled by Republicans, um, and Democrats had to find better excuses. This is again like the real sort of win-win. Um, is like if the Democrat like Bernie can do something in a position like that, let's see it, and if he can't, well, it's good to know too. But I want to talk about something he's doing with regards to Howard Schultz. But first, and this is something we've hinted at before, David and I, and something we'll talk about, I think, going forward. Alex Press, when she was on Majority Report with Emma, also, this is a context I feel like leading with before we get into other unionization things. So Jonah Furman at Labor Notes, but this is in Jacobin. I wrote about the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics report on union membership in the U.S. By the numbers are still quite firmly in an era of union decline, with almost every union, every industry, and every state facing more or less dramatic declines in unionism. I think there are plenty of ways to think differently about the U.S. labor movement. The militant minority may be growing. Unionism is extending into new sectors. The changing shape of the economy is large. At large is a huge factor, but the bigger decades-long context of that is decline. Also, somebody Dave and I should get on is Doug Henwood, who points out this graph here. Union density keeps falling. As it has for 37 years, 37 of the last 50 years, the share of the workforce belonging to a union, aka union density, fell in 2022. It's risen in only 4 years in that span. It was unchanged in 9. The grim history reported this morning by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the graph below. I also find it interesting, you see that public union chart there. And I would just say that is one reason, among many others, why I wouldn't attack a teachers union for standing up for their COVID safety protocols at this time. But I won't get sidetracked into that. There's a story in Bloomberg here that was very interesting on the Howard Schultz front. Starbucks baristas are unionizing. And even Howard Schultz can't make them stop. Even Howard Schultz, even the guy who had the idea of NFTs, can't, the genius. I mean, he's a billionaire that got BTFO'd of the Dem primary in a very short time. But, even he couldn't do this. Great section here. A month earlier, Starbucks convened a hand-picked group of about 20 baristas from Southern California in a conference room in Long Beach for what sounds like one of history's less fun 3-hour pizza parties. Basically, it was a focus group. They spent the first hour watching Schultz's speech from earlier that week. I wonder if it had the this is like a train to Dachau, and we all need to share a blanket. If he kept that in the pitch, or if he maybe started omitting that. Basically, it was a focus group. They spent the first hour watching Schultz's speech from earlier that week. Then Schultz himself entered the room and took a seat in their circle of folding chairs. A monitor asked the employees to react to a list of potential grievances, such as our stores are short-staffed. Then use sticky notes to mark up the wall with ways the company could improve things. Oh, that's fun. That's how public. The meeting got tense when one of the invited employees, Madison Hall, shout out to Madison Hall. I mean, genuinely, this is impressive to take this moment. I think having a union behind it. Well, let me just finish reading this paragraph before I give props. But the meeting got tense when one of the invited employees, a union activist named Madison Hall, asked Schultz to speak about the company's retaliation against organizers. In response, the CEO accused the union of disrupting a recent memorial service for an employee. The union denies that. I wonder who I believe. Which he said reflects the disrespect of an organization that doesn't know who we are. So just regardless of if like Howard Schultz did a surprise last minute scheduling of a memorial when he found out union people were going to be speaking somewhere, which is what I imagine, like if anything remotely close to this happened, and he's not just lying, which I imagine is another strong possibility. Disrespect. What's disrespectful is not giving your union unions a contract. That's disrespectful. That's all I really care about. I don't know what we're talking about here anymore. Like this, oh, you scheduled something in an insensitive way. Bro, you're talking about NFTs, which you said the disrespect of an organization that doesn't know who we are. Yeah, it's that you're the boss that they're unionizing against. Then he returned to themes of the speech, to the themes of the speech the invitees had just watched. His childhood could not give a fuck, bro. Um, his quest to do better. Ooh, yeah. How about sign some contracts? The good perks. Hall, sitting a few feet away, told Schultz that tuition-free college is great, but doesn't pay the rent. I mean, that's just absolutely true. I'm sensing a lot of anger from you about Starbucks, Schultz told Hall. If you hate Starbucks so much, why don't you work somewhere else? Starbucks told Schultz, wrote that Schultz aimed to bring the focus of the meeting to the task at hand. Ooh, Taskmaster. That's nice. Yeah, sorry, David's out today. After the activists attempted to divert it. The activists attempted to divert it, like instead of just our feel good, sticky note exercise of things that don't actually demand anything of me, a boss. Uh, let's bring it back to the task at hand of take the sticky note and maybe do a sad face, because that's what you're being. You're being a sad face. Uh, Bernie Sanders writes, and I don't want to read this whole letter. I do want to read this whole letter, but I'm not going to. I write to express my serious concerns over Starbucks' concerted and relentless campaign against its workers' efforts to organize. The National Labor Relations Act declares it to be policy of the United States to encourage collective bargaining. Nice of that to be on the books. Workers have a fundamental right to organize and participate in workplace democracy without fear. Sorry, I switch screens. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Um, without fear of employee interference or retaliation. Unfortunately and unacceptably, Starbucks has shown flagrant disregard for those fundamental freedoms and has engaged in a pattern of egregious and lawful behavior. Therefore, I urge you to immediately halt your union busting campaign. And he goes into all the unfair practices filed against them, the Jazz Brizak unlawful termination. Jazz Brizak appeared on Majority Report. You should go check that out. Uh, Mr. Schultz, Starbucks has continued to delay tactics in pending cases, both before the NLRB and in the federal courts, as well as in bargaining with the union. It has been nearly 400 days since the first Starbucks union was certified by the NLRB, and yet you and your company have refused to bargain a first contract in good faith. Instead, you have approached bargaining sessions with increasingly intense obstacles that include shutting down pro-union stores. Yes, and puts in the context of this risk should not be difficult. Starbucks is a $122 billion corporation. In the first 9 months of last year, Starbucks made $3.3 billion in profits, had enough money to provide its outgoing CEO, Kevin Johnson, with a $60 million golden parachute on top of his 39% payers. I mean, that's a golden parachute. That is more than that's fucking Steven Crowder turned down over 4 years. While Starbucks workers have risked their health and well-being to make your company successful during the pandemic, you became $800 million richer and are now worth $3.8 billion. There's a story here that I also have linked below in the description that I want to shout out by journalist Isabella Escalona. This is focusing on Starbucks workers in the Minneapolis area. Starbucks is trying to wear workers down through its relentless soft union bust. And of course, this is not just happening in Minneapolis. This is anywhere Starbucks, anywhere Howard Schultz's Starbucks is operating. Over 270 unions on a single contract. I'll make this a little bit bigger for folks. Just over 1 year since the first union win in Buffalo, New York, 270 Starbucks stores have unionized and counting. While Starbucks corporate has delayed and stalled at the bargaining table, workers across the country have continued the pressure on the mega coffee chain, complicating its once progressive public image. Though nationally and regionally coordinated strikes and actions, from the Red Cup Rebellion to a boycott of holiday gift cards, the unionized Starbucks workers are resisting the company's effort to wear them down. And especially as we get closer to talk of recession, you hear a lot of layoffs in tech. And I'll just say these guys have been fucking waiting for it and just wishing for an excuse. And of course, we've seen that with inflation. Like, oh, give us an excuse to keep jacking up our prices. But I remember when I was on vacation last summer, hearing about all this stuff of yeah, it's a recession. We're a recession, and this the eagerness for it to be a recession. Uh, the eagerness for like say us to call it a recession, which is like, oh, we should give some government intervention in the economy and create more safety nets, is entirely different than the reason that say Ted Cruz would say call it a recession, or Howard Schultz wants to call it a recession, which is that, oh, free, I get to fire you excuse card regardless of how much I gave to investors or the previous CEO as he pieced out. A little bit more from this article here. In Minnesota, the first Starbucks, and people will be familiar with this dynamic. It's interesting. I keep thinking about this because I was a barista, and all this stuff is familiar. The being scheduled under availability that you request and that sort of stuff um, is very familiar, and it's just like the context of for me at Caribou Coffee, Moorhead, 35th Street was we just, even though I was like a progressive, it just wasn't like, oh, we should unionize this. That just wasn't an idea. And I'm ashamed of myself that it wasn't, because like at that point I had already, like, I remember like I checked out this book like what do unions do, because like my family wasn't in unions, but I was basically uh you know lefty-ish nation reader, so I'm like, unions are probably good, right? But like it never occurred to me to be like, oh yeah, this place I'm working at right fucking now, let's do that here. I think it's very impressive of these folks. Uh, in Minnesota, the first Starbucks union was one at 300 Snelling. I think that's near the guitar pedal store I like. In St. Paul, soon after. Oh no, I'm confused. Soon after the workers of 470 announced theirs, Edina also successful union drives in Mall of America and St. Anthony. But the workers behind this wave of unionization in the state now face a stealth war on the part of Starbucks. The company's softer union busting can be difficult to organize against, explains Tinkelberg. At times, leadership can come off as very friendly and even seem supportive of the workers, yet management is meeting with union busting lawyers on a regular basis, he says, and those lawyers are helping them to organize and deny workers pay. Ethan Carson, a barista at 300 Snelling South, Snelling Ave South location, says it feels like his store is always perpetually understaffed, causing stresses for workers and customers. Yet when the Starbucks workers went on their most recent strike on December 16th, the stores conveniently were able to find enough managers and corporate staff to cross the picket lines and keep the store running, he says, a resource that never seems to be available when workers are workers are facing heavy workload and short staffing on an ordinary day. Now, how fucking stupid does management think workers are that you wouldn't be insanely, maybe more sensitive to that than anything else at work, right? Like, and that's the end of. But I do really recommend people share and read this Workday magazine piece. Uh, um, and that's where we're at. Shout out to that. Uh, let's get her name, Madison Hall. That's so goddamn impressive that you go right to Schultz's face and bring that up to him. I mean, that's the type of energy that actually moves things. That's the type of individual action that actually gets shit done, and it's you love to see it in the pages of Bloomberg, especially.